Mr. Chair, you are now live.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Charter Revision Commission. The date today is the 20th of July. It's 2 minutes after 6 p.m. Jacqueline, I understand you will give the roll call tonight?
Yes.
Thank
My first time ever. So
exciting.
all members present, please announce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Andy Hare. I'm the chair.
Okay.
Jeff Durand.
Jeff Durand.
Paul Rankin.
Paul Rankin.
Lawrence Harris.
Lawrence Harris.
Eileen Leahy.
Eileen Leahy.
You're up, Rob.
Rob Tufts.
Rob Tufts.
All right.
We have two excused absences that I'm aware of, Edmund Ark and Ron Schneider.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, with that, I would like to hear a motion if we could approve the minutes from the 1st of July.
So moved.
I second.
Any objections? Hearing
Oh,
none.
Rob, was that you at the second?
It was Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, got it.
Hearing none, the minutes are approved. I'd like to take a chair prerogative and thank Eileen for an outstanding job, especially under enormous distress, given the fact that there was a huge storm that night. And we had a lot of people. I think Paul was not able to even join, or he was able to join us, but only by telephone. And so we had people losing power. I know, I think Lawrence was involved in that storm also. So with that, my hat's off to Eileen. Thank you very much for doing an outstanding job.
Happy to help.
Okay, moving on to item 4, we have public testimony. We have records indicate that we have comments from 3. Number 1, Mr. David Frankel lives on King James Landing Road, Annapolis 21403, addressed a topic covering election law. Number 2, Miss Kathleen Potter, the topic of partisan elections. We thank them for their submissions. Number 3 is Miss Debbie Yatsuk, lives on Fox Hollow Lane, Annapolis 21403, on the topic of the form of government and elections, and she has requested live testimony. So with that, I turn the floor over to Ms. Yatsuk for 3 minutes.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, let me see if, okay, here we go. There we go.
Great.
Is that better? All right. Hello, good evening. My name is Debbie Yatsuk. I live at 418 Fox Hollow Lane in Ward 5, and I've been a city resident for about 40 years, and I've been involved in different groups and activities during that time. I did submit testimony to your last meeting, July 1st, and I submitted testimony as well today, July 20th. So I submitted 2 written testimonies. Last time was on nonpartisan elections, the need for them, and today was on the council manager form of government and abolishing those little 3-member city council committees. I just want to confirm you all received my written testimony as well. Right?
Yes,
Okay.
and I think this is Eileen Leahy, the secretary speaking. I did respond to that.
Thank you. And I do trust that if you have not read those, you will. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But My concern face to face to you tonight is that the city council has not listened to the former charter revision commissions. So the one 10 years ago and the one 20 years ago, both unanimously recommended nonpartisan elections and a council manager form of government. I do have a report from 1995 from the Greater Annapolis Chamber of Commerce that had 7 points that went along with the CRC recommendations. And number 1 is to restructure the city government to a council manager form of government. 2, the mayor be made part-time with a salary commensurate. And 3, all city elections be nonpartisan to increase cooperation throughout city government and reduce opportunities for conflict based on political affiliation. And there's a few more, but I trust that you have all these copies that I have of previous work done so that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. So my concern is that if you also recommend, as your 2 former commissions recommended, to go for nonpartisan city elections, which, as you know, there's 157 cities in Maryland, only 3 are left with nonpartisan elections. This is similar nationwide, by the way. So we are way out of line. It's costing a lot of time, a lot of money, going with the antiquated version we have. My concern is
30 seconds.
What is going to change? What is going to be different this time? If you've worked hard, you've been appointed, you took it seriously, you made your recommendations to council this fall, and then they could just ignore it like all the other times. What can we do as citizens? Because there's people more than me. There's lots of people like me. What can we do to help you implement your recommendations going forward?
Mrs. Yatsik, your 3 minutes are up.
And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your submission.
Sure.
And to your point, I would like to amplify not just this, but this is really to all commission members, that everyone review the comments. If it's done on a web form, we all get them. I read them. I know many of you also read them, and I urge you to not only read what comes in on the web form, but also on our shared drive. So, Ms. Yatsik, I do appreciate the comments that you've given, and for what it's worth, yeah, we do read them, and we do take them quite seriously.
Rob wants to say something.
Rob, please.
I just want to thank Ms. Yatsuk for her comments, and to let her know that, you know, one of the first things we actually talked about when we started meeting as a commission was exactly that last topic of hers, was how are we going to get the council to listen to us, you know, to act on the report that we're going to submit. So, so she's right that, you know, obviously, you know, we're putting in this time, and we want it to be put to good use. And so it is something that this commission has talked about. And I imagine as we get closer to releasing the report, we'll continue to talk about how, you know, we can encourage the council to take up our suggestions, our recommendations. So.
Other comments? If she is still on the line, I would just, and I hope she stays on for the entire duration of this meeting, only from the point of view that when we get to the end, that is going to be the one topic that I will try to emphasize extremely. How specifically do we get, to use the sports metaphor, how do we get the ball across the goal line? How do we take the hard work that we've done so far and we're preparing to do over the next month and 2 months to get it to a point where it actually becomes something that is useful and it actually can work. So again, we do thank her very much for the comments that she shared with us. I would like to move, if you'll allow me, to the chair's report, which is item 5, I believe, on our agenda. I will use the focus of this to give highlights of the meeting that we had with the city council last Thursday. As most, if not all of you know, we met with the city council in the afternoon, and essentially the way the meeting was broken up, we had about an hour with them. The report actually exists. You're more than welcome to read it on the shared drive. We have both the spoken words that were given, but also the handout materials that we actually gave to the older men and older women. So as I said, it exists on our shared drive. Of course, the entire meeting can be viewed in its entirety. We are fortunate to have 5 of us there at the meeting: Ron, Ben, Eileen, Paul, and myself. The full council was also represented. Basically, we talked about, or at least the theme of what we talked about was what we have done so far, the work efforts to date since the middle of March. We discussed outreach. We explained how it worked, how the subcommittee worked to actually reach out to not only them, but also to various interest groups and stakeholders within the city. Interestingly enough, 2 additional council members raised their hand and actually asked to be interviewed, which we thought was interesting, because invites had been sent to all of them. That outreach is in fact going to be scheduled, as I understand it, this week. We actually shared, which I thought was important, what our end game was. In other words, when we get to the final report that we're going to submit, we're going to talk more about not so much specific changes as have been really the mantra of prior reports, but really what we believe should be. So we're going, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. We explained all of your comments. We went through in detail, and I thank all the commission members for the comments provided. But we've assembled them all into a working document. I think in the end, it turned out to be roughly about 4 pages. I'd love to hear observations from those that actually did join us. But I felt that the questions were quite lively. The council was fully engaged. I thought the questions were good. And I think it showed me, at least, that there's a keen interest in the work and the work product that we're going to come out with. Remains to be seen. Any comments that we have? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I had the pleasure of being there. 2 points, if I could, and a tiny bit just pats on the back, but I think it's important to do for those of you who weren't there live. Eileen did an extraordinary job pulling together lists of the people we've contacted, the outreach that we've made. That's a lot of work, and I appreciate that. I know we all do. And I thought, Andy, you did a great job presenting very succinctly, very cleanly, a lot of work in a short period of time. Your presentation covered a lot in a short period of time, and I just thought you did a super job. And I too thought the council was engaged, and that's great stuff. So thanks to the 2 of you, Eileen and Andy.
Thank you. Rob?
I just want to second Paul. Even though I wasn't there, I did watch the entire thing on through the YouTube channel, and so I just want to thank all of you who did present that day. You all did an excellent job representing our work, and I just thank you for that. And also, I should own up that I'm one of the people who should have reached out to Alderman Gay, and I dropped the ball on that. He has been reached out to now, and so I'm waiting to hear back from him.
Yes, Lawrence.
Pay will be docked for that, Rob.
Yeah.
I too did not attend, but I did hear about 2 days ago from my alderwoman, Rhonda Pindell Charles, who was there, and she thought it was a great presentation. She's very pleased that we did give them a chance to hear where we headed with this report, and the type of people that we are talking with in order to pull it all together. And Rob, I'll tell you, if you can catch up with Mr. Gay, good luck to you. Our community association has been trying to meet with him for at least the past 6 to 9 months, and he has been very evasive. So when you can catch up with him, as indicated, Eileen can tell you, I thought I would join you as well to be able to ask a few questions.
Absolutely. I'll definitely keep you in the loop once I hear back from him, so we can set up a time. If you could do me a favor, actually, and send me some dates, times that you're available, so we can kind of get a jump on that then once he does get back to me, so we can schedule something right away. That would be helpful.
So we'll do.
If I could add really for both of you, I felt, and Eileen, Paul, I'd be interested if you had shared that. I felt he was keenly interested to talk. I mean, he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was the first to actually say, you know, I would really like to spend time with you. So, I mean, the interest is there. So I just hope he's not, he may be very busy. That may be the problem, that, you know, he may be tied up. Other questions or comments about last Thursday? Okay, hearing none, what I'd like to do now, this is really the only other part of the chair's report that I'd like to cover, and it's more of a sanity check. I'd like to validate something that we discussed, if I'm not mistaken, if not in the first meeting, possibly in the second meeting. And as we move closer to the final weeks of our work effort, and I think we only have a few months left, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, you know, given the fact that we've got our work session in a mere 2 weeks' time. As far as the sanity check, I think what we talked about, again, in that second meeting, and I want to make sure we're still thinking the exact same thing, because this is going to dictate really the direction that we head as we go into the work session. We're still looking at 2 tracks. We want to propose a broad rewrite. This is track 1, but a structure that is functional. So in other words, it's going to be, we might even say that this is a long-term effort that's not actually going to have specific changes in it, but we agree that the present charter, while it's useful, falls short with being functional. So in other words, there's a bit of a concern that we want to make sure that the council understands that they have a fairly big project on their hands. That's point 1. And I think point 2 that we talked about in that second meeting is that we will make recommendations on specific changes. Many have been identified so far. I believe we were trying to figure out how many, but we think there's roughly about 30 that we've identified so far. So it's going to be a 2-track approach that we're going to use. And I just want to seek your comments now to make sure we're still on at least the same page as we push towards the work session in 2 weeks. Comments? Eileen.
I'll raise mine that I had raised earlier, and I know Andy has described it, but I was wrestling with the idea that in one sense, we're telling the council it needs to be restructured, it needs to be redone, and yet we are reporting and kind of focusing on the current structure. So, you know, I was having difficulties with that, and I raised that now just in case other people were just conceptually looking at it differently. So I'm fine with how Andy has described it now, but I did have a little bit of difficulty with putting a couple of things together.
Jeff.
So I've been a little detached, but I like the fact that we have this 2-track or proposed 2-track approach. And I don't know if this came up in the conversation. I apologize again for my lack of attendance the last 2 meetings. But is there a way to pursue track 1 by taking the recommendation of, hey, there should be a commission maybe not this commission, but a follow-on commission that does the hard work around the full rewrite. You know, that's all they think about for whatever X amount of time, and maybe do it article by article so that the council isn't overwhelmed by all the potential changes, because we've all read it 2 or 3 times and we know that it's begging for revisions. So it's almost, I hate to use the phrase, but maybe kicking the can down the street a little bit on track 1, saying, hey, our advice and our recommendation is you really need to, we recommend that you pursue this, and to do it in a thoughtful manner by continuing on with another appointment process of a CRC, while at the same time taking track 2 and actually proposing some very specific changes that they could digest and vote on to see if they agree with them or not.
Comments, Paul?
Yeah, I think Jeff has it about right in my view, as to how I see this thing proceeding. I think that Eileen also has it right in the sense that, I mean, it's a bit of an oddity to, on the one hand, say this whole thing needs to be redone, but in the meantime here. But I think that's a good thing in the long run. I mean, I really believe that, well, assuming the rest of the group concurs with the viewpoint, my view is that it does need to be redone, and it does take professionals to do it, and it's going to take quite some time probably for a dedicated group of commissioners to rewrite, you know, a 250-year-old charter. On the other hand, you know, there really are some things that this next council ought to look at to make what they currently have better, and for the city to operate better. And I think it's a responsibility of ours to at least provide those suggestions to them with some backup information as to why we believe our position or positions are correct. So I can understand the problem, but I also think that 2 tracks is a good thing.
Eileen?
Again, because my concern is that if we give too much in the second track and say, these are the things that you could do now, they're going to do that and forget track 1. And so I kind of think if there's a way in which we can prioritize and say, these are 5 things that you could do now that probably will be in the future one. But if we give them 30 recommendations and they start doing charter amendments, when one of our recommendations may be, don't do charter arrangement, charter, you know, changes or amendments in between. Yeah. So I think we have to really think about, you know, on the one hand, we're saying this, but then we're also saying this. And I think it's helpful, particularly since there'll be a number of new members, not to overwhelm them, or just to kind of think that, okay, we'll take care of what they say needs to be taken care of. We'll do this, we'll do that. And then the track 1 doesn't get done. So that's my concern, I think.
Lawrence, Lawrence,
Yeah, I would just like, I concur in what has been discussed in terms of the way to go forward. But I would just like to remind everyone, and I'm sure you all know it, that whatever is done here in terms of either recommendations or to recommend a complete rewrite, it'll finally end up in the Office of Law, where it will be scrubbed to the point where we will hardly recognize whatever is done, which has been my experience in the past.
Yes. Paul?
Yeah, I can't comment on Lawrence's thing because I haven't been here long enough to see the process. I sure hope you're wrong, Lawrence, but I suspect that you've been around. I know you've been around a heck of a lot longer than I have. So, but I also think that, you know, to speak to the 2 tracks thing, and I'll go back to one of Lawrence's issues that he brought up, maybe in our second meeting, maybe in our first, which was, you know, cybersecurity and issues that something like that has to be done. And it probably does. I mean, maybe the city law says, no, it doesn't, we're already taking care of it. But I mean, from our perspective, I mean, goodness gracious, those kinds of things have to get dealt with. And so I see a group of those issues. I appreciate, frankly, very much Eileen's point. I don't know that we have 30 of them, but we certainly have some. And her caution is well taken.
Absolutely.
More comments? Yeah, I think, you know, just to put a cap on it, I think all these comments are good, and I share the same concern, because I think the driver for me is the first track. I think, but to Eileen's point, we can't let whoever the council happens to be, when they have to execute that first track, we can't let them just decide, well, we're still working on a lot of the little detail, and then get lost in basically the weeds or being very satisfied that they're working on the charter, but they've lost sight of the bigger picture. And I think it's going to be incumbent on us in how we frame that in the final report, so they don't have an opportunity to ignore that first track for the satisfaction of having worked on some small issues in the second track. Okay, with that, if you'll allow me, I'll move on to item 6 in the agenda. Committee reports. I've got 2. One is the executive committee. I've given the chair report. Do we want, Paul or Eileen, do we want to add anything with you? Because I know most of it was worked on trying to put together the midterm report for the city council. So is there anything else we need to add?
I think it was just the midterm report and then thinking about the working sessions. So
Okay.
I did drop the notes for that meeting, and they are posted on the Google Drive. So people are welcome to look at it.
Okay.
I can't think of anything else to add. You, Paul? Okay.
Good. We'll come back to the work session when we get into the general discussions. On the outreach committee, anything, Paul? I know Ben's not with us, but anything, or Rob?
No, I think the comments by the 2 council members was probably the only thing that is new from at least to my knowledge. Rob, do you have anything else that you can think of? I think that's it.
Okay. Okay, good. If I can move on to item 7, where Eileen, I'm giving you a run for your money in terms of being efficient running this meeting. I was so impressed how efficiently you ran the meeting on the first. In terms of discussion, I'd like to basically divide this into 2 parts, if we will. Maybe an update, any updates now, as opposed to us going through each specific subgroup that we're working on. I really would like to just highlight any specific changes, so we'll very quickly go through that. And then I'd like to wrap up by talking about the work session that we're going to have on the 3rd of August. Eileen?
I just had one point. We had talked also in executive committee about synthesizing or pulling together some themes from the different interviews that we had with city government, department heads, and using that kind of as a group report also. So I just want to let the other members know about that.
Okay.
Things like separation of power seems to be coming to the surface, organizational chart. So that was something that we realized when we talked, that we hadn't really looked at all of the community, group, and individual information that we've gotten and really try to pull it together. So.
Other comments on?
Right. So I think, Paul, you said outreach would probably work on that.
Yeah, I think that probably falls into our purview. So we should do that. So we should pick who we're going to do, but I was thinking elected officials, city primary officials, department heads, elected officials, and, key staff, council, and so forth. sort of pull all those reports together, draw out the points that are similar from each and key points made, and then use that. Does that sound about right?
I think so.
Because there are some things that have come up in those discussions. I was going to say, there's some things that have come up in that discussion that haven't come up in our reviews. Things like the size of the city that was mentioned at the working session, and that came out of an interview with someone else. Again, separation of power seems to have kind of risen a little bit to the top, and just some other things of just maybe looking at that.
Yeah. Yes. We'll pull something together and put it on the table.
Okay, so if we could go through the working groups now, and I'll just rapidly go just to the point, if we have anything to report that's beyond what the work that we did to put together the midterm report for the city council, that's what we should cover now. So if I could start with the preamble in Article 1. Hearing nothing.
It's useful pointing out you presented that to that final draft final preamble.
Yes,
to the
very good point.
Council.
And I would say it's fair to say if most, if not all, of the city council members read that and had a comment on it, and had a very favorable comment on it, or at least some had some favorable comments on it. But I tried my best to say this is a draft, this is a work in progress. We're surely agreeable to amend it or modify it or clean it up. But I think that was something that did get more traction than I was expecting at that meeting last Thursday. Okay, Article 2 on the elections. Anything new? Nope.
I don't think so. Eileen, you and I, and none of us, we have nothing.
No, okay.
Yeah,
Article.
but I think Paul and Eileen, of course, if you would like, we should probably meet before the work session, I feel like. So let's talk about that offline.
I did want to mention a funny thing. I was meeting with the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections the other day, and they happened to mention that they knew that you all had talked to Washington County, because Washington County talked to them. So not only is Annapolis a small city, but Maryland is a small state.
And I like the shout out that we got from I think it was Alderman Arnett. I think he was impressed that we were, going outside the city and the county, and talk to people. So I appreciated him recognizing that. So
and Alderwoman Tierney mentioned it also. She also was very happy that not only were we going, outside the county, but we were going throughout the state. And in some cases, given the fact that we looked at the state of Washington and actually the document that's coming out of Colorado. So I think she was happy that we're expanding our knowledge, and I'll hopefully I'll get into this when we talk about as we lead up to the work session on the 3rd, just in terms of the kinds of work that I think would be important to do between now and the 3rd. Only, as I say, only 2 weeks away. Article 3 is powers. That's Ron and me. Nothing added there. Article 4. And Article 5 is together, which is Eileen and Minor, City Council and the Mayor. And
Nothing additional to report, except we'll probably be looking a little stronger at forms of government for discussion at the work session, and also how to really approach the concept of separation of powers among those groups.
Okay, Article 6 is operations. Paul, Ben is not with us.
No report.
Okay. Article 7 is finance. Jeff?
The only thing, Andy, is nothing more to report, but we did have that conversation with Jody Dickinson, and she had not had really any time to spend on reviewing the charter. So I was just going to reach back out to her to see if she'd actually I'm not saying the chances are high, but to see if she actually reviewed it and reviewed it from the standpoint of Article 7 and see if she has any additional insights or input that she wants to provide to us.
Okay, good. Article 8, which is personnel, and Article 9, which is miscellaneous. Ben and Paul.
Our
This is-
personnel recommendations would not be unchanged.
Okay, so they'd be
on the report.
roughly the same.
Yeah.
Roughly the same. And then Lawrence, in terms of the essentially the principles, the larger group, which, by the way, did get a shout out during the working group session that we had, the working session that we had with the county, with the city council.
I have, excuse me, I have nothing additional to add, Andy. I think
Okay.
I was trying to think of another subject that has not been touched, but I just kind of stopped where we were.
Okay, good, good. Okay, I think that's a good segue into talking about the work session that is in a mere 2 weeks. It's actually 2 weeks from this afternoon. The executive committee had an opportunity to discuss this when we met this afternoon, when we actually had a conversation this afternoon. And I think there was almost universal and even strong agreement among the three of us that the meeting on the 3rd is not going to be a whole lot of time. We will only have 4 hours. And that's going to restrict enormously the amount of what I would call maybe random or loose conversation, just or opinions or views. And so what I'm urging as strongly as I know how is to try to get each of you to go back to what you've shared with us so far. In other words, the key points that you've shared with us so far, and dig deeper, do more research, probe a bit more. I'm going to send an email out in terms of maybe broad questions. And I don't mean this to come across as a quiz, as much as it is just trying to provoke, if I possibly could, some thinking in terms of what you've actually contributed so far. I'm really keen that when we meet on the 3rd, that each of us has spent a significant amount of time with reflections, research, and possibly very real proposals. And I know, again, among us, we've always talked about we're probably going to have to start with some fairly strong and fairly concrete written examples. So in other words, it's going to mean just taking a yellow pad out and writing to the extent you possibly can. So with that, I tried to come up with maybe some very broad factors, if we could. And broad factors from the point of view that if you take a section, and I don't want to get specific because I don't want you to be distracted by something too specific. But if you take the section that you're working on, answer the question, why does it matter to change it? What are we trying to do? What specifically is the difference you're trying to propose? So in other words, trying to get you to think deeper than just the specific proposal that you have, and trying to get you to think in terms of why specifically it does matter. Maybe even ask your question, how does it work now? How ought it work better? The next thing, and again, I said, I'll follow this up with an email just to at least put a little bit of meat on this conversation. What is needed? So in other words, when you look at something, it's not just a matter of saying we want to change something. How do you want to change it? What specifically do we need to change to get it enacted? And now this is an important one. This is also, it goes with that second point, not only what is needed, but I think what you need to ask is what might be the result if you change it. So if we're looking for something, and I just violate something I just said, let's say we're looking for a balanced budget. Specifically how, what do we need to do to achieve that? partisan versus nonpartisan elections. What specifically do we need? And then the final point, I would love to have you really probe as deeply as you possibly can. It is to try to find out what's the bottom line? What are you really driving at? What outcome do you want? Where do you see this going? So if something gets changed, I know sounds awfully philosophical, and I don't mean it that way. I just don't want to get too specific, so the conversation or your thinking gets too distracted in one way or the other. And again, the overarching thing I'm trying to achieve is to get each of us to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. So when we come together on the 3rd, we're probably going to go through not only section by section, but we're going to go through that overarching, that track 1 that we're going to talk about, and try to figure out exactly what do we want? What do we want in there? And I go back to our commenters' presentation tonight, because I think one of the things she was saying is, how can we do this in such a way that once the report is finished, once the report gets submitted, that the council, whether it's this council or a future council, will actually do the work. Well, actually, and I think we have to be awfully convincing to say, this is the reason why you can't ignore this. And so it's got to be compelling enough that it actually makes that case. Enough said. I would really like to get comments, if I could, on this proposal. And I promise you, I will get a very quick, brief email out, and really for Ron and Ben's benefit, who are not here on this meeting, and Minor also, who's not here, just so they think along these kinds of lines. And when we come together 2 weeks from now, we're pretty well armed with a lot of discussion. So we'll have a lively discussion, and hopefully we'll get some closure, if you can, on what direction we're going to head on this thing. So with that, I open it up to comments. Paul.
Thank you for the outline. Minor has joined us, looks like.
Yeah, I was offline only because I had some young kids here and I didn't want them screaming in the background.
Okay.
They might have
Hello, Minor.
They might have had some good ideas for us. I appreciate everything you said, Annie. I wanted to put sort of a dot point on a couple of things. I mean, as you mentioned in your discussion, we only have 4 hours for this meeting. I mean, obviously this August 3rd meeting, and we obviously have more time other than that. But I think just in your report to the council, you had, as you noted, somewhere in the area of 30 possible recommendations, and that works out to, in a 4-hour session with no breaks, 7.5 minutes per point. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is an admonition to myself and to everyone else, is that I think we need to come with ready to talk in bullet points. Here's the recommendation that we want you to consider. Here's why we want you to consider it. Maybe not necessarily what the outcome might be at this point in time, but here's why we want you to consider it. And here's a few backup reasons why we hope you go in this direction or that direction. And then we're going to have some conversation, and that's not much time. So I want everyone to appreciate going in that we are very time limited here. And I'm not sure we're going to get through all 30 points. We should be so lucky, but I hope we are that lucky. But
yeah, to follow on Paul's point, I think my thought there, Paul, which I agree with, you start doing the math, is to prioritize at the points and just say, all right, start with, if you only, let's say we go section by section or article by article, plan to make your case for your first 2 points or your first 2 proposed changes, because you're not going to get to 3, 4, and 5 or whatever. We're only going to have so much time, and I think we do need to prioritize what we think is, I guess, in the opinion of the commission, is begging for change versus things that we can maybe move to track 1 and address it in a longer term fashion.
Eileen, did I see your hand? Oh, I saw Rob's hand
Yeah,
too.
that's right.
Eileen and then Rob, please.
Okay, I was just going to mention that we had also talked about other ideas about preparation in terms of reading materials. I didn't know if you wanted to bring that up now or
Yes,
more
please.
logistics. We had talked about, just to kind of get us all on the same wavelength, or at least some exposure, to put up some of the things that are in Google Drive, such as the Maryland Municipal League articles that Rob has posted, the National Civic League model charter, and give you a list, or give all of us a list, to make sure that we read that, so that we do have a little bit of in-depth knowledge about how other things are done in other areas, and may also add to our specific presentations, because we do really have to have some reasons behind why we're suggesting what we're going to be suggesting. So you'll be seeing that go out, and I'll also send out some things as far as logistics. And I also think it's important for us to listen to the other side, and also to include, as the past ones have the past reports have done, is there another way of looking at it? Are there people that don't agree with the nonpartisan? Are there people that don't agree with a certain type of government? So I think we want to also think about that also, and encourage people to kind of brainstorm, not just brainstorm, but to hear other approaches to things, but then really have to come to consensus as far as the overall report.
Rob, we'll get to you in a second, because I think there was two very crucial points that Eileen just made, and I echo them and support them completely. A, listen to the other side. I think it's absolutely vital that we come into that particular meeting with a totally open mind. And then the second, which is equally as important, it sounds almost contradictory, is that eventually we're going to have to come to a consensus. And so I think those are two very, very valuable points, and I thank you for them. Rob, please.
I'm wondering how much, I didn't even think of the math. So Paul, thanks for pointing that out. I mean, how much of that work can be done ahead of time? I mean, is that something that we could, put down on paper, so that we actually come to the work session prepared to discuss, as opposed to presenting and discussing?
Well, that's my goal, is to do
Okay.
that work beforehand.
Oh, okay.
Because
Sorry, I missed that.
We get to the 7.5 minutes. I'm not even sure what the math is, but and I trust Paul's math, but it just is flat out not going to be very much time. I think there's a second issue, which I'm not exactly sure, but would like comments on how we're going to put our mind around. And that is that there is a terrific amount of overlap that we have in various issues as we go through the entire charter. Separation of powers is probably, we've used that word a half a dozen or a dozen times over the last hour. And I think as we were putting together this midterm report for the city council, it's very clear that separation of powers bleeds between at least 4 of those articles. So, we get, and Rob, this may be your point, how do we work that out? I'm not so sure that part of it can be worked out before the 3rd. Maybe that's something we've got to work out on the 3rd, when we're all together and we start talking about the commonality of an issue, of a particular issue, and then we have to sort it out. But clearly, I want to raise my hand as high as we possibly can to do the work over the next 2 weeks. Take what you've sent, take what you've thought, and I'll just put these probing questions out, just to, again, this is not a quiz. It's not trying to get one to answer an email as much as it is just to get you to think and start doing some research and writing on a blank piece of yellow, legal pad, of what your thoughts and ideas are, and then bring that to the meeting on the 3rd. Other comments? Yes, Paul.
Just to build on Rob's point, I mean, maybe to the extent that our little committees, come to conclusions about what it is that they wish, their top 2 priorities and then their bottom 2 or whatever, however that works out. Should we just distribute those or post them on the Google Drive or something like that? Because so that people can start looking at it ahead of time.
Well, we have the points that are from the midterm report. Do you want, I can set up another file if you're whittling it down more. Is that what you're thinking?
I'm just sort of thinking, and this is just wandering around a bit, but maybe what would be useful is a format. In other words, a proposal, which would be, so you have the bullet points that say Rob and I recommended on elections, let's just say. I think we did 3 or maybe 4, but so you'd have the proposal, reason, potential outcome. You don't have to get into massive text, that's for later, but maybe something that makes it very simple so we all present it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yes, I'm thinking maybe, Eileen, maybe you have some place special for it so we can all look.
Yeah, I mean, I can find a place. I think actually for myself, I find using Andy's questions as a way of just, even if we just use that as a format, why does it matter? Does it work? Could it work better? Just to use that in terms of how we all are analyzing and looking at it. And again, I think that's helpful for the final report in terms of having one voice. And that kind of follows what you're kind of talking about in terms of proposal, reasons, and outcomes.
Yeah, I just think issue, what's the issue?
Mhm.
What's the little subcommittee's recommendation? And then you follow Andy's
Okay.
approach.
And I'll send that email out. I'll send it out tomorrow morning, just so you have it. Again, please, this is not, it's not intended to be a quiz. It's not intended, it's to get you to really think through.
Yeah, that's good.
Just probe, and do and Eileen used a very nice word, which we shouldn't lose sight of, which was research, because I think she has done a great job of assembling things that we can use to get us to think even deeper on given subjects and so forth. And it's not that we need to cut and paste or copy any of this. What it is just to say, here's a format that's, somebody's already thought through some of these things. These things might work, these things I know won't work. So it's to really come to the meeting on the 3rd with something. I think as we also get closer, and this is actually something, Eileen and Paul, that we did not discuss, we probably should have a pretty good idea of how we're going to run the meeting on the 3rd. So there's at least a tad bit of structure to it. So we don't, waste the first half hour, 45 minutes just trying to figure out what we're going to do.
I guess. Go ahead, Eileen.
I was just going to say quickly, when you talk about research and we're talking about reading materials, I found it really interesting. Go back to that first document where we all first looked at the charter and our first impressions. And it's very interesting to see how far we've gone. So I encourage everybody to make sure to do that.
I looked at that. I looked at that for the meeting we had last Thursday. Yeah, it is worth reading. Paul, please.
Yeah, the only other thought that crossed my mind is what to do if you don't have unanimity in your subgroup. Let's just say Rob, and I'll just, because I'm picking on Rob today for fun, but Rob wants X and I don't really like X. Should we just note that? But it is an issue because it's obviously something that the commission has to look at. For example, the last commission voted 7-2 for nonpartisan elections. So there was obviously 2 people who didn't want that. Should we just maybe when we draft these things up, just note, unanimous recommendation, not unanimous recommendation. Something simple like that.
As for somebody that ran the policy function for a country, that's the way we did it. So when we had the equivalent of a minority report, if you will, if you're looking at a policy position and you cannot, the policy officers, the policy staff could not come to an agreement on this. What would happen is all of the policy, A, B, and C were then presented. At the end of the day, the Minister of Communications can make the decision, but at least he had the benefit of seeing all 3. And you could justify that. I don't think this was your recommendation, but I don't think we should lose the B and C just because, the two of you or three of you can't agree.
No, just the opposite.
Yeah, I think presented.
It's not our job to tell you to not give you something that
Right.
one person wants.
You'll
Our
see
job is to
A,
present
B,
it.
and C. You'll
Right.
see them. You see all three of them.
Yeah.
And then as a commission, then we're going to have to come to some reckoning. What's the direction of the commission? Minor, are you raising your hand?
No, I was just trying to move my light. So
Okay. Any other comments on this? With that actually gets us to the end of our discussion.
I was just going to mention, just to make sure everybody knows, the meeting is at the Pitt Moyer Rec Center, Conference Room 3. And we'll start at 3 o'clock. We'll have some beverages and some snacks, and it will be a public meeting. So testimony can be given, but there's no, take that back. Did we say public, public testimony? The public can attend, but there will not be
Participation.
any public testimony or participation.
They can participate, but there will be no opportunity for them to, they can be there.
They can be there, right? I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
keep
they-
getting it mixed up. So as a working session or a work session, it won't necessarily, and it won't be recorded.
Right.
So just so that you all know kind of the feel for it. So there will be a chance for people to be there, observe, take notes, but not necessarily interact with us.
And we did learn that there will be internet access available. So if one wants to bring a laptop or whatever, just to, I don't know, play solitaire, do whatever. Whatever it happens, or gamble or whatever one does on a laptop these days.
Is this, because it's like an official meeting of us, will this be televised as well?
It's not. We've
No.
been told it's not.
It's because we're calling it a work session. So it
And we
doesn't
have-
need to be recorded.
And we have a quorum, which means because of the quorum, it then falls into, Jacqueline would know the answer. What's it called? The Public Meetings Act, I believe. There's an act that controls this particular, so we have to make it accessible. So the public can walk in if they want to walk in, but they don't have the opportunity to participate per se.
Yes, the Open Meetings Act.
Public Meetings Act, correct.
Open Meetings Act.
Yep.
Open meetings.
Open Meetings Act.
Open Meetings Act, okay.
Yeah.
I even read part of it.
But there would still be minutes kept and posted.
Right. Comments? Any further issues? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank
All
you.
right.
We will adjourn this meeting at 7:01 on the 20th of July.
Great,
Thank you very
thank
much.
you.
all right,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Cheers.
Hey, Brigida,
Yes.
I just want to check with you. Do you have, I'm supposed to be taking minutes. Do you have down what time we started?
I do.